Hello everyone, and a warm welcome to our regular press briefing on COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutics. This is Monika Benstetter from Amsterdam, and it's my pleasure to present our panel today. We have with us Dr. Cavaleri, the head of Biological Health Threats and Vaccine Strategy, and also the chair of the EMA's Pandemic Task Force, and Dr. Fergus Sweeney, the head of the Clinical Studies and Manufacturing Task Force. Dr. Cavaleri will give you a quick rundown of recent developments. We then open the floor to your questions to our panelists. Just a few technical points before we start. Your microphones are presently muted. We will unmute you when you take the floor to ask a question. The briefing is live broadcast on YouTube, Twitter, and Europe by satellite, and the footage can be used free of charge. And now, without any further ado, over to Dr. Cavaleri. Marco, please.
Thank you, and good afternoon to all of you, and thanks for joining today's COVID-19 press briefing. I will provide you a brief update on some of the recent development, and then, as always, we will open up the floor for your questions. So let's start by saying that last week, our Human Medicine Committee, the CHMP, recommended the use of a booster dose of the COVID-19 vaccines Comirnaty in adolescents from 12 years of age. The CHMP considered that the immune response to a booster dose in this population would be at least equal to that seen in adults, and the data review did not highlight any new safety concern. The recommendation of the CHMP is based on safety and efficacy data from a clinical trial of a booster dose, data from the published literature, and post-authorization safety data. During the evaluation, the committee also reviewed real-world evidence from the use of a booster doses in young recipients in Israel. The Ministry of Health in Israel provided safety data from almost 400,000 adolescents who had received a single booster dose. No new safety concerns were identified, and we looked in particular at myocarditis and pericarditis and found that the cases remained very rare, and most of them recovered without requiring any clinical intervention. We are also aware of the data reporting from the United States CDC on more than 1 million adolescents receiving a booster dose, and with similar reassuring conclusions. Also last week, the CHMP recommended granting an extension of indication for Spikevax primary series in children aged 6 to 11. In this population, the vaccine will be administered in a lower dose, which is half of the one used from 12 years of age. The recommendation of the CHMP is based on a main study in children aged 6 to 11, which showed that the immune response to the lower dose of Spikevax was comparable to that seen with the higher dose in 18 to 25 years old, as measured by the level of neutralizing antibodies against SARS-CoV-2. The CHMP also recommended the use of Spikevax as a booster dose in people who have previously completed a primary vaccination series with another messenger RNA vaccine or an adenoviral vector vaccine. This recommendation comes on the heels of a US-based study which showed increasing neutralizing activity after using Spikevax as an heterologous booster. In this context, CHMP also allowed reducing the interval between primary and booster doses vaccination with Spikevax, as data indicates that a booster might be given as early as 3 months after primary vaccination if there is an actual need. These recommendations are provided by the EMA to support decision-making of the public health authorities in the European member states, who will consider a number of factors such as the epidemiological situation in their countries and hospitalization rates across different population groups who may not have been yet boosted. We are seeing that a number of European countries have started offering an additional dose of messenger RNA vaccine to people who are severely immunocompromised. In this population, this additional 4th dose corresponds to the first booster dose, as 3 doses of a messenger RNA vaccine are considered as primary vaccination due to the lower immune response here. These decisions by the member states are in line with the EMA's recommendations. Some member states have also started giving a second booster dose to elderly people over 70 or 80 years of age. And this approach would be justified by the fact that elderly people would be more vulnerable than younger adults with respect to waning immunity and to the risk of severe COVID. However, for EMA to issue a recommendation in this sense, we will first need to collect sufficient clinical evidence. EMA will keep looking at all the available data on the use of a second booster dose of messenger RNA vaccines. In particular, we will be looking closely at the evidence that is coming from Israel. At this stage, however, there is not enough evidence neither to establish the need of a second booster dose in the general population, nor to allow us to formulate a recommendation. Recently, several studies have been published which are looking into the protection from SARS-CoV-2 conferred from the T cells component of the immune system, which plays a fundamental role in our immune response. Some studies point out that these cells contribute to protection against different variants of the virus and could last for a very long period of time. T-cell responses can be especially relevant for protection against severe disease. More research is therefore warranted to better understand and dissect the key components of the immune response that confer protection against SARS-CoV-2, so to design vaccines that retain broad and long-term protection against coronaviruses. The rollout of Nuvaxovid, which is the vaccine from Novavax, is starting in the European Union. We will be discussing with the company the latest results from their clinical trials to support a booster dose and use in adolescents from 12 to 17 years of age. We will also be looking carefully at the data on the ability of this vaccine to elicit high antibody levels against several variants, including Omicron. Preliminary data are showing the Nuvaxovid immune response after primary series achieves neutralization of Omicron, even if this is lower than for other variants. But this is, however, similar to what we have seen with other vaccines, including messenger RNA vaccines. EMA is also regularly updating the approved vaccine to include new manufacturing sites and additional suppliers. Recently, we have recommended new approvals for manufacturing sites for Spikevax, with one facility added in Spain and additional production capacity granted to the active substance manufacturing site in Switzerland. These recommendations support the EU effort to boost both production and supply of vaccines for deployment both in the European Union and in the rest of the world. The European Commission has recently published the update figures for the number of doses exported. In total, 1.9 billion doses have been delivered to 166 countries worldwide. The epidemiological data is showing a substantial decrease in the number of new infections in Europe, even though the situation varies from country to country. The cases are still largely driven by the Omicron variant and its subvariants. Overall, the evidence available at the moment points to Omicron as a cluster of variants which differ in terms of some of the mutations, but which all share a common origin. Even though the Omicron wave appears to lose some momentum, it is still important to be cautious as this variant is highly transmissible and new subvariants may still emerge over time. The available evidence undoubtedly shows that vaccination and boosters are key in preventing severe disease and hospitalization. It is also clear that people who are not vaccinated suffer the hardest consequences of COVID-19, and for this reason we want to encourage all European citizens to get vaccinated and to get a booster shot, and to do that without further delay. Recently, the US CDC has published data which clearly highlight the benefit of vaccination for pregnant women. COVID-19 vaccines have the potential to protect the mothers and the infants from hospitalization. These data are consistent with EMA's finding that indicate that messenger RNA vaccines are safe and effective during pregnancy. We still have an active pipeline of vaccines and therapeutics against COVID-19 that are coming for scientific advice. In fact, since the start of the pandemic, the Emergency Task Force, the ETF, has dealt with a total of 158 procedures for COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutics. The rolling reviews of the vaccines developed by Valneva and Sanofi Pasteur GSK are currently ongoing, as you know, but it is still too soon to point to a concrete timetable. The rolling review of the monoclonal antibodies cocktail called Evusheld, which is expected to retain activity against Omicron BA2 has progressed, in the next few weeks, we could move towards the submission of a marketing authorization application. Finally, we are also advancing in the discussion with manufacturers and international regulators to determine the most effective ways to rapidly conduct and collect clinical data for new monoclonal antibodies supposed to be active against Omicron. I will stop here and give the floor back to our moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cavaleri, for this very comprehensive summary. I will now open the floor to questions from accredited journalists, and I can see that the first question is from Rosen Lesin from Mediapart. Rosen, we will unmute you and give you the floor. Rosen, please.
Hello, thank you for taking my question. I have 3 questions about the Sanofi COVID-19 vaccine. I will not ask you for a timetable, but I know Sanofi has not applied yet with its complete application, but when did Sanofi file its pre-release for its marketing authorization application? Was the pre-release part a request for a booster only or a request for the primary injection on the booster? And the last one, will the EMA initiate an accelerated review procedure for the marketing authorization application or a traditional procedure?
Thank you very much, Rosen, for these questions. So there are 3 questions all in all. I think the first one was about when Sanofi might submit an application. The second on whether or not this is for booster only. And the third one, whether or not this will go for accelerated assessment. And I would like to ask Dr. Cavaleri to respond to these questions.
Yeah, indeed, this vaccine, as you know, is undergoing a rolling review, and we are actively discussing with the company by when the clinical data from their pivotal trials will be submitted. Based on that, we will then understand what will be the next step and define exactly the timetable, and also consideration to a possible formal submission for an application for marketing authorization. Indeed, we are aiming to look both at data for the primary series and also for boosters. So we understand that data for both type of use could be made available very soon, and we will be very happy to look at all of them and to try to understand if we can come out rapidly with an opinion in both settings. And of course, as said, this is ongoing rolling review, which is already a tool to accelerate the assessment, which would mean that indeed, once we have seen sufficient data, we can then enter into a market authorization phase, which will be extremely rapid and more rapid than what we've seen in other cases with standard timetables.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marco. The next question is from Helen Collis from Politico. Helen, please.
Thank you. I have 2 questions. The first one is regarding the situation in Ukraine. Can you tell me if the European Medicines Agency is playing any role in coordinating any kind of response in medicines and medical equipment there for people in the member states, for refugees, or for people coming or supplies going into Ukraine? And then secondly, could you update us on the review of Molnupiravir, please? I understand that the data was looked at last week at the CHMP. Thank you.
Thanks, Helen. For the first question, I would like Dr. Sweeney to comment on EMA's role or the extent of our involvement in the Ukraine situation. Dr. Sweeney, please.
Thank you, Helen, for the question. So EMA, our role obviously is as being the regulatory body in charge of the scientific evaluation of medicines. We are monitoring the impact of the crisis or potential impact on the supply of medicines in the EU very closely. Now, we don't have a direct role in the supply of medicines from the EU to third countries and countries outside of the EU, but we are ready to give advice on medicines if it's required by the European Commission or member states in carrying out their humanitarian aid efforts. And we are in daily contact with the Commission and the coordinating bodies in the EU to follow the impact as it unfolds.
Thanks, Fergus. And I would like now to comment, Marco, on your second question, Helen, that was on the review of Molnupiravir. Marco, please.
Yeah, indeed, the review of Molnupiravir is still continuing, and there are still many aspects related to the pivotal clinical trials that we still need to clarify, and that's why we are in dialogue with the company in order to understand whether all these aspects can be sorted out, and only then it will be clear what could be a timetable for conclusion of this procedure.
Thanks, Marco. Now I would like to give the floor to Ludwig Burger from Reuters for his question. Ludwig, please.
Thank you very much. I'd like to, my question is about a report from this week about vaccine efficacy in children aged 5 to 11, based on data out of New York State, pointing to a decrease in vaccine efficacy in that age group. Have you looked into this? Is this a cause for concern? Is there anything you can guide us, or any future communication from EMA expected on this development? Thank you.
Thanks, Ludwig. That would be a question for Marco, please.
Yeah, we've seen the data, and we are hoping to conduct a proper assessment of this study. However, I have to say that, yes, this study showed somehow lower protection from symptomatic COVID-19, but still is within the frame of the level of protection that we are overall seeing with the vaccines that we have against Omicron and after a primary series. So indeed important to look at all this data, and more data might be coming in the near future, so that we can understand better how to use this vaccine in this population. But we will not be particularly from with respect to these results.
Thanks, Marco. And now I see we have a question from Victoria English from MedNews. Victoria, please.
Thank you for taking my question. I'd like to go back to Dr. Cavaleri's comments on T-cell response with two questions. Have you gathered your information about this from the real world? Is it real world evidence that you're looking at, or is it from clinical trials? And then the second question is, have you noticed these T-cell responses irrespective of the mechanism of action of the vaccine? For example, would they apply to the mRNA vaccines as much as for the protein subunit vaccines?
Thanks, Victoria. Both questions for Marco. Could you please comment? Thank you.
Yeah, so mainly the evidence that we have are coming from clinical trials and specific studies, or, longitudinal studies that try to measure the level of T-cell responses in recipients of the different vaccines. And of course, one of the most important findings has been that these T-cells epitopes are very much conserved across the different variants of concern, and indeed, they are very well conserved against Omicron. So now we are trying to better understand all the different components of these T-cell responses, which are, there are different types of cells with different precise function, but also we've seen that these are staying for a very long time. And this is a characteristic that is well important because they could provide also some sort of cross-protection across coronaviruses in general. So not only restricted to SARS-CoV-2 and its variants, but also related, for example, to SARS-CoV-1 or MERS or other coronaviruses that in the future may cause problem and outbreaks. So that's why there is an interest in trying to understand how better to design vaccine that could cover this area of the immune response, so that to have vaccines, they may have a larger breadth of coverage and can be helpful in the future behind SARS-CoV-2. Yeah, there are differences across platforms, but it's very difficult really to quantify exactly what this means and whether there is one platform that would be better than the others in terms of, let's say, CDA response, the kind of T cells that are able themselves to kill the virus. So it's very difficult at this point in time to make clear-cut distinction among the different platforms, but we will be looking into this for sure.
Thank you very much, Marco. Now, I can't see any further hands up. So I do take it that Marco covered a lot of grounds in his introductory remarks. That means I can only thank you now for your excellent questions this afternoon and for attending our press briefing. A big thank you to our two speakers. And as always, if there are any further questions, don't hesitate to come to the EMA press office. For now, thanks and goodbye, and see you soon. Bye-bye.